In today's video, I'm breaking down some of the sweetest uncommons that I've seen so far in the Marvel Super Heroes preview season. These cards are pretty unique, they're pretty interesting, and so I wanted to talk about them in the context of draft and sealed for your pre-releases or your draft events. First up is Claim the Kingdom. It's 1 and a green for an enchantment plan, which is a new type of enchantment in this set. It has landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control and a plan counter on this enchantment. When the 4th plan counter is put on this enchantment, sacrifice it. When you do, put an indestructible counter on target creature you control. Now, we've seen cards like this in the past that let you turn land drops into +1/+1 counters. Those cards can be a little bit hit or miss, a lot of the times leaning a little bit more towards the weaker side because they tend to put like all of your eggs in one basket, even if you can distribute those counters around. But basically what that means is if you play this in the early turns of the game and your opponent is just like using removal spells on your creatures, then you don't necessarily get to fully leverage like the counters because you've just kind of put yourself like an extra resource invested into buffing your creatures. So in some matchups where they have more removal spells, it doesn't work out. And sometimes if you just need more pressure, you'd rather just play a card that affects the board on its own. However, this indestructible counter is really catching my eye because indestructible is so hard for certain decks to deal with. They might have 1, maybe 2 ways to deal with it in their entire deck via exile-based removal or things of that nature. Some color combinations, I'm thinking of red-green specifically, often has very few ways to deal with an indestructible counter. It's going to kind of depend on what some of the removal spells are in this set. Black has a -4/-4 at common, so that can kind of get around indestructible. White might get an exile-based removal spell, and blue might get some bounce or something. But in some matchups, I could see this counter being really annoying. I could also see, depending on if there are ways to make multiple land drops with one card, like something like an Evolving Wilds or like a Terramorphic Expanse type thing, where you can get 2 landfall triggers with 1 card, because putting an indestructible counter on a creature is undoubtedly very annoying to deal with, and there are going to be certain matchups where it's very good. And if you maybe have like a way to have like a counter spell so that the one removal spell they have that can deal with it can get countered or something like that, you could just have a threat that's like unbeatable. And I feel like that's pretty interesting. I don't think this card's going to be crazy good, but indestructible potentially for a creature at uncommon is definitely something that caught my eye. Next up is Super Intelligence, another uncommon that's kind of wild to read. It is a single blue mana enchant creature. At the beginning of the upkeep of enchanted creature's controller, that player draws a card. So if you do somehow get your creature indestructible and then put Super Intelligence on it, it might just be drawing you extra cards every turn. But basically, it's a really cheap way to kind of make the game into a protect the queen scenario, where if you just keep your one creature alive, you'll eventually run away with card advantage and win the game. But it does cost a single mana, and it does open you up for removal. So it kind of makes the game hinge around it in an interesting way, where maybe if you have Super Intelligence, maybe there'll be one of those combat tricks that blue often gets that gives a creature hexproof until end of turn, or things like that, where you can kind of have these protection spells built in and then use those while your opponent is like firing removal spells off, and then you're just trying to draw those cards. It is also interesting because it does mean that you don't really want to tangle with that creature in combat anymore. So maybe you want to be kind of like able to use Super Intelligence when you're like already pressuring your opponent with a flyer, and then the flyer is like already attacking past their blockers, because you don't really want to block with your Super Intelligence creature. It's overall one of those cards that I think is going to be generally maybe a trap, because you don't want to like put an aura on your creature, have it die, you get blown out. But it could lead to some pretty interesting scenarios and will be a card maybe you can build around. And I think that's just a kind of interesting situation as well. So Super Intelligence, another card that I kind of like the design of. Next is Agent 13, Sharon Carter. It's 2 and a white for a 3/2 legendary creature human spy hero. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, investigate. I kind of like these cards. So investigating, you make a clue. You can spend 2, sack the clue, draw a card. I like these sorts of cards that incentivize aggression in a different way, where a lot of the times aggressive decks are just like swarming with creatures, attacking, getting some card advantage, like not getting card advantage, but they're just swarming with creatures, attacking and winning the game quickly. This one is like, okay, my white deck that wants to attack, so it probably wants to be aggressive because it's trying to attack instead of just like turtling up and sitting behind its shields. It needs to have at least one creature that has like a profitable attack, and then I'll be able to start using that to get extra cards. It's nice that you can play a 2-drop, immediately play Agent 13, attack with your 2-drop, get that clue token, because it's just whenever a creature, it doesn't have to be the Agent 13. And then even if your opponent deals with it, you end up a card. I think these kinds of cards are really interesting and fun to play with. They lead to kind of, they also don't end the game that fast a lot of the time, because your opponent is going to be like attacking you with only one creature at a time if they're using this, or sometimes you'll want to attack with multiple creatures to push extra damage, and that's like a decision to be made instead of just like defaulting to attacking with all your creatures. So I kind of like this design, relatively simple but also powerful and also interesting to kind of think about. Next is Death to Our Enemies. It's 2 in a red for another enchantment plan. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a tapped treasure token and put a plan counter on this enchantment. When the 4th plan counter is put on this enchantment, sacrifice it. When you do, it deals 7 damage, divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets. So does nothing when you play it. 2 in a red, does not affect the board at all. Immediately kind of discounts it from being a card you would want in like an aggressive red deck. I feel like a lot of cards just kind of slot into like, oh, red aggro decks or things like that. This one's not going to really slot there. But it is kind of interesting when you think, okay, I can probably kill 2 creatures with this if I can stack it up. So if you do play it in the early stages of the game, you get some treasure tokens. All of a sudden, you eventually cast your 4th non-creature spell, and you're able to deal 7 divided as you choose. You can also just deal 7 straight to your opponent's face. That's something really scary. I think this card's going to lead to a lot of tension in games where your opponent has this in play, and you're like, gosh, I really need to win this game before this thing ticks up to 4. And you've built your opponent is thinking, oh, I've built my deck in such a way where I have like all non-creature spells. That could be pretty interesting. There's also like artifact themes in this set, and so making the treasure tokens could be good for like the artifact themes. I kind of like these cards where you play them and they don't really do anything, but then if you've built your deck in a good, successful way, they can kind of then thrive in the future. Because the downside of top decking this card when you have no cards in hand and you're like super far away from getting anything done with it is a pretty big deal. But you kind of want to offset that by when you play it on turn 3 in your deck, it's like insanely good and is going to get you a 2-for-1 and a bunch of treasures. And so overall, I think this is a really interesting design. It's going to be one of those ones that is pretty skill testing in how it plays out, and I'm excited to see how it looks. Next is Robot Domination, another one of these plans. You can see these plans kind of have the juices flowing in my mind. Like, oh man, how can I maximize these? How can I use these? What are they going to be good for? It's 3 in a black for an enchantment plan. Whenever 1 or more creature cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, you draw a card, lose 1 life, and put a plan counter on this enchantment. When the 3rd plan counter is put on this enchantment, sacrifice it and create 3 2/2 colorless robot villain artifact creature tokens. So basically, 4 mana does nothing, but it then starts drawing you cards. And once you have put the 3rd plan counter on it, so it'll draw you 3 cards, lose you 3 life if you're triggering it consistently, and then you get 3 2/2. So you'll get 4 mana for 3 2/2s and 3 cards, losing 3 life if you can manage to get it to work. The kind of key to this card, I think, is the fact that there is the mechanic in this set which is called Connive. It took me a while to think of all of the words flowing in my head, but it's when you like draw a card and discard a card. If you discarded a spell, the creature gets a counter on it or whatever. There's a decent number of cards that connive in this set, so you can discard creature cards to trigger your Robot Domination, because it just says when they go to your graveyard from anywhere. If there are any cards that like mill your own library, which there may be, there may not be, if those cards are present in the set, this card also gets better because those cards can naturally trigger the Robot Domination as well. And if you are able to consistently get this to go off, maybe within 2 turns of playing it, like you play this on turn 4 and you don't necessarily get it the following turn, but you get it within 2 turns of playing it, that might be good enough. You really want to get it to flip the next turn though. So you have this, and then the next turn, maybe you have some sacrifice shenanigans, or your creatures are trading off, or something like that. Your opponent really wants to pressure you, and so if you do have a couple creatures in play, you go like 2-drop, 3-drop Robot Domination in your kind of defensive deck. They kind of have to attack in. You get to block with your creatures. That just makes the Robot Domination happen faster. Pretty interesting card. Again, these cards that do nothing when you like top deck them, or do nothing and give you like put you behind and then kind of help you catch back up, are pretty interesting designs, and I think the plans are going to play out in a very interesting manner. Next up is Evil's Thrall. It's 2 and a red for a sorcery. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. If you control a villain with greater mana value than that creature, gain control of that creature until the end of your next turn instead. Untap that creature, it gains haste until end of turn. This is such a like classic Magic effect that we see all the time. Taking your opponent's creature, often you give almost every single other instance you give it back to them at the beginning of your end step. But the fact that you have the chance to keep it for a whole extra turn cycle, if you have a big villain and are taking a medium-sized creature, is very cool to me. I think that leads to some like interesting gameplay decisions. It leads to some interesting deck building considerations, where maybe you take a high mana cost villain so that you can use Evil's Thrall more effectively. A lot of the time you kind of pair these things with sacrifice effects, and the fact that you can use this and then sacrifice the creature the following turn so you have all your mana available is also interesting if there are some sacrifice shenanigans. And overall, I think it's kind of interesting to think about how much you value taking your opponent's creature for 2 turns, where if you don't have a way to sacrifice it, if you eventually give it back, like taking it for 1 attack often isn't good enough, but if you're taking something for 2 attacks and removing a blocker for 2 attacks, is that good enough? It does a lot more damage. It makes your opponent much more likely to have to chump block it or something like that. Overall, pretty interesting card, and I think it's going to be like one of those ones where you read it and you're like, okay, how can I make the most of this? How can I take their creature for a little bit longer? I like the fact that they're taking a classic card design, adding a spin to it that we haven't seen before, and giving us a lot to think about. And I like thinking about these sorts of cards and how to apply them. Next up, we have a land, Avengers Tower. It taps for colorless, or add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a hero spell or activate an ability of a hero source. You can spend 4, tap it, look at the top 3 cards of your library, reveal a hero from among them, put them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So these lands that get you card advantage are really interesting to me as well. It's going to depend on how many heroes you can fit within a deck and whether or not you're going to be able to consistently draw a card when you activate this. But I tend to think that these sorts of uncommon lands are pretty good. It's going to also depend on how fast the format is, because these lands get better if the format's slower, where the board stalls out, both players just have armies of creatures looking at each other that can't do anything, and all of a sudden you just get to start activating your land. It could also lead to a cool scenario where you are able to splash a hero more effectively in a deck than others, like other types of cards where like an instant or sorcerer you can't cast with this, but if you're splashing a red hero in your blue-white deck, all of a sudden it gets like more possible. And it also digs you towards your cool cards. I think overall these lands tend to make games of Limited more interesting. They make it so that one person has some pressure on them to push through. They make it so that it's not just like game going, one person eventually top deck something. The person can actually feel like they built their deck to have an edge in these mid-game, in these like matchups where it's like, okay, I took this land that's going to maybe give me a little bit of a downside in the early game so that it can help me in the mid to late game. And you can kind of make those decisions when you are drafting and building your deck. And I think these sorts of cards are awesome. And so I wanted to highlight another card that's very similar, also an uncommon, Baxter Building. Taps for colorless. You can spend 4 and tap it, add 4 mana in any combination of colors. And then it has 4 tap, draw a card, activate only if you control a creature with toughness 4 or greater. So similarly is going to be able to be like a late game way to break board stalls. And I think this ability to add 4 mana in any combination of colors is really, really cool, because there are some cards, like I can imagine if you get like a couple Baxter Buildings like in your draft, even though it's an uncommon, maybe you get 2 of them, all of a sudden you start getting kind of tempted to just splash like all sorts of like random stuff where like all of a sudden a double pipped card maybe looks a little bit more attainable. Or maybe you just can splash a card that's like multiple off colors if you have a couple Baxter Buildings. Or you just use this for your own creatures, and then you can like kind of fix your mana for like a 3 color deck, and it can be like, okay, I'll get 2 green, 1 blue, 1 white, or whatever the like weird mana costs of your creatures are. Or it can make it easier to cast cards that are very, very heavy in pips, because some rares might be like quadruple black to play or something like that. Overall, just a kind of land that, again, gives you some flexibility, gives you some late game card draw, and you're kind of looking for creatures with high toughness if you have this card in your deck, so you can prioritize those a little bit more. And I think that's kind of interesting as well. So I think the land's definitely an interesting little wrinkle on the format. Even at uncommon, you'll see them pretty frequently. And overall, there's lots of sweet card designs that seem like they'll play out in a very interesting manner in this set. That's going to do it for this video, though. If you made it to the end, leave hashtag cool design to let me know you made it to the end, because I think a lot of these designs are pretty cool, and I didn't even get to talk about all of the cool designs I've seen so far. Hopefully I'll cover those in a future video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.